Hello, Phil Jordan here. It's been a while since I've done a podcast, but I thought I would do one on some of my psychic thoughts about the intriguing mysteries of Easter. As a pastor, as a psychic, and even as a funeral director, my careers have all sort of intrigued me as to trying to figure out the spiritual connection of Easter for me as a Christian. And perhaps for anyone who's thoughtful and intrigued by the idea of life after death. As we know, Easter came about after Good Friday when Christ was crucified. Terribly horrific death. The perpetrators of the crime made it just as horrific as possible. And I think that we as Christians look at that point as a time when suffering was done for us, and that it would make us aware that no matter what we suffer through in life, that there is a peaceful destination. Whether it's our physical death, whether it's a death in life such as a separation from someone we love, or a divorce, or death of a job, death is very much a part of life. And life goes on. And from a spiritual standpoint, I've had so many different experiences that prove to me that our identity remains after the change called death. That our spirit maintains the same physical identity that we bear in life, even though we do not have our physical being. And it's very hard for Christians to perhaps comprehend that, because there's so many different ideas. There's the idea that we maintain a sleep in the grave, and that in the time when Jesus returns, we shall all stand up and walk with Jesus. There's the belief that our bodies come back to life. As a funeral director, my common sense tells me that that's not probable. That the procedures for preparation of the body and perhaps cremation may not be able to allow that to happen. But yet there's people that do believe that we have a physical and spiritual resurrection into the next life. Some of the Christian community believes that we, in death, just fall asleep, and then when Jesus comes, we wake back up. My belief is that we will all, as Christians, have a day when Jesus returns, but I think it's individual. It's individual in that we all have our day when Jesus comes to us in death and brings us newness of life and the new world in the spirit world. I found it intriguing in biblical literature that Jesus appeared several times after his death. He appeared to the women on the road to Damascus. He appeared a couple times in the upper room, and we know through Scripture that one of his disciples, Thomas, doubted his resurrection, so to speak. And in doubting that, he had to prove that even though the disciples the first time saw Jesus and told Thomas that Jesus had appeared to them in the upper room, Thomas didn't believe it. So he said, I just want to see that for myself, and I want to be able to touch Jesus and put my hand in his wounds and see his wounds in his hands and his feet and in his side. And he doubted so much that we still carry the term doubting Thomas, which came from the doubts of the Apostle Thomas. Yet Jesus appeared when Thomas was in the upper room. He came through into the upper room, and he appeared to the point that it was so physically real that Thomas was able to touch him, to see his wounds, to touch his wounds, and he no longer doubted. And I think often in creation, a spirit may manifest itself so strong that we sometimes believe that that spirit is physically in their body. And I do know from my experiences with the spirit world that when we see somebody who has been deceased, no matter what age they died at, there's a glow about them, and there's a thing where they look the best they ever looked at the time in their life when they looked their best. And they may look a lot younger, even if they died in their 90s. They may look a lot younger, but we know who they are. We recognize them spiritually, even though we may think that isn't what they look like. It may have been what they looked like 50 years ago, but it certainly doesn't look like now what they looked like at the time of their death. I believe that Jesus was such a strong spirit that he appeared to be physically able to, his spirit was able to manifest his physical being. And they believed that his body was very much alive. And when we consecrate communion, we remember the Last Supper, and we remember that he commended his body and blood as a symbolic reference to giving of himself to humanity. But I think the phenomenon after his death recalls to us that he continues to give himself to us. Now, I've had a couple instances in my life that have sort of proven my thoughts psychically to my life and to my faith. And I believe my life fits into my faith fits into my life, and that I've been given a gift to discern spiritually different things, and have used that incredibly throughout my lifetime to resolve missing persons cases, homicide cases, things of that nature. But it's also through these spiritual experiences that I have seen spirits that manifested themselves where I thought it was the actual person with me and not just their spirit. They manifested themselves so strongly spiritually that it appeared to me that they were there in body and spirit. One of those was about 6 years after my mother died. I awakened, I was in a small apartment, and I awakened one evening a little after 3 a.m, probably, I think it was 3:07, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed, and I was groggy from just waking up. And I sat there and suddenly realized that my mother was sitting there with me. I could feel her hand on my knee. And she said to me, "Philip, you have mourned my death for a long time. I had my life. You're not living your life if you continue to mourn my death." And she says, "Take what I gave you in life and live your life. Don't live it in a mournful way. And it was then that I had awakened enough that I realized that can't be my mother. She died 6 years ago. So I looked to my left where she sat on the bed near me when I saw her for the first time, felt her hand on my knee, and she disappeared. She was gone. But her hand on my knee, I physically felt, just as Thomas felt the body of Jesus. And my mourning, my grief disappeared with the apparition. My grief no longer was there and has never been there since, because I know that her spirit had made a transition into a spirit world where our bond of connection called love kept us together. One other incident that is probably one of my most unique spiritual experiences. I was doing a public show at a hotel here in the Triple Cities of southern tier of New York State, and it was on Veterans Day, November 11th, and there, of course, was a big parade in the city, and my program started at 2 o'clock at the hotel, and I was in a banquet room where the audience was seated theater style with an aisle down the middle. And I came in and started the show, and there was a woman sitting on the corner on the left-hand side of the aisle, and she was sitting with a man who was wearing a World War II uniform. I could see his name tag, and I could see that he was wearing a World War II uniform, so I assumed he had been in the parade a few hours before, didn't go home and change because he was meeting his wife or whoever she was at the show. So I normally took a 15-minute break halfway through the show, and she got up and left. And I took my break. When I come back, she had resumed her seat, and the man in the uniform was no longer with her. And I had wanted to talk to him. So I said to her, I says, is the man that was in uniform with you going to return? Because I really wanted to talk with him. And she looked puzzled. She says, there's been no man sitting next to me. She says, I had reserved that seat for my girlfriend, and she was to join me, and she had a flat tire on her way to the show, and she didn't make it. And I said, well, who was the man in the uniform sitting next to you during the first half of the show? And she says, there was no one there. It was an empty seat. And I said, no, it was a man in a uniform, and I know that it didn't look, I couldn't see through him. He wasn't transparent. He looked just like you or I sitting in a World War II uniform. And I said, well, I saw his name tag, and I mentioned to her the name on the name tag. And her eyes welled up with tears, and she got a little bit, I think not fearful, but sentimental maybe. And she said to me, you just gave me the name of my brother who was killed in World War II. And so it was proof to her that her brother had been with her, proof to me that I was seeing a spirit because it was somebody I never knew, her or her brother, and that he was around her in love, and that he was there commemorating Veterans Day on November 11th. It was so real to me that that man looked physically present. And I think maybe that's what happened in Easter, that the Spirit of Jesus, who is such a strong spirit and went on to become the Holy Spirit, that was so real that the disciples who became apostles, they were so spiritually in tune to Jesus through their love for him that they manifested him not only spiritually but physically. The women on the road to Damascus, they probably revered him so spiritually that he manifested to them physically so they would recognize him and that they would come to understand that he was still very much alive, not physically, but in spirit. And that's always helped me to know and understand the resurrection. And a lot of people will dispute, well, what about the body of Jesus? I don't really have an answer for that, what happened to the body of Jesus. But I do know that his spirit manifested itself so that they knew that Jesus was alive after the crucifixion, that horrible death, that the resurrection, which he had predicted 3 days after his death, that resurrection happened. So it affirmed my faith, and it affirmed my work, and we know that there's all kinds of mysteries surrounding the life of Jesus and even his parents. St. Joseph relied on his dreams, and it's recorded that an angel of the Lord came to visit him and warn him to get the Christ child away from the rule of Herod. And it was so real to him that he said an angel of the Lord, or manifested in a dream. And it would have been a dreamlike state he would have been in, because it was uncommon to him to really know that until it happened, that a manifestation of a spirit who talked to him, an angel of the Lord. That angel could have been his grandmother, his uncle, his aunt, whoever. But it manifested, and it manifested to Joseph because of one thing, the bond of love. And I think what happened with me, with my mother and my grief, she was really both parents to me, because my father was a rather abusive alcoholic, a good man, but alcohol ruined him on many occasions. And I needed my mother. And that bond of love remained very, very strong. And she loved me enough to help break my grief. She loved me enough to take away the mourning that I was going through. And I think sometimes people so long to hear from their departed loved ones that they want it so strongly that our loved ones sort of don't let that happen, because it just continues our grief or renews our grief. For 6 years, I wanted to hear from my mother. It took 6 years. But she finally realized that through her love, she could end my grief. Jesus realized that through his love for humanity, he could help them to understand his resurrection into spirit life. He could help them by appearing to them to end their grief and to know that he was no longer in that physical body suffering. And we go on with story after story of average humans experiencing the love of spirits coming to us, either in our dreams, like I think a spirit may come to us in our dreams. We actually create a dream around their visit, so it's more believable to us. I think that we often will sense their presence around us. Something may ignite that. We might hear a song that was their favorite song, and it just ignites an awareness of their presence. One of my mother's favorite songs was Danny Boy, the Irish song Danny Boy. And last fall, I was thinking about my mother as I was driving, because I often have my psychic experiences where, while I'm focused on driving, it creates a conscious awareness on and focus on something so my unconscious mind can perceive things psychically. And I was thinking about my mother and sort of saying, well, if you're around me, let me know you're there. So I turned the radio to a country and western station. And lo and behold, on that country and western station, they were playing Danny Boy. Now, not many country stations play Danny Boy, the Irish song. But it was playing, and I thought, that's good. I don't think she did that. I think it might be what some would call coincidences. But for me, it was awareness that my mother was around me. The Irish believe birds are a messenger of the spirit. It isn't that our loved ones have turned into a bird. It's just that a bird tapping at our window might be something that we should pay attention that our loved ones are around us because they've sent a messenger of their spirit. Interesting story about that, which I think I shared on a previous podcast, that I had an uncle whose name I carry as my middle name. And his wife, my aunt, was very close to me, and she told me this story. My father met my uncle in a bar in England the night before D-Day. Just happened to be in the same bar and he looked down to the end of the bar. Through the smoke of this smoke-filled bar room, he said to his buddy with him at the other end of the bar, he says, I got to go down and tell that guy he looks just like my kid brother. So he went down, and lo and behold, it was his kid brother. And they shipped out the next day my father was on the fifth wave at the battle in Normandy of Omaha Beach, the bloodiest battle of the invasion. His brother shipped out. Almost 2 months to the day, his brother was killed in the war. His brother had only seen his daughter one time when she was 3 months old and never saw her again. So the day that it happened, his wife, my aunt, was doing her laundry, hanging it on the clothesline, and this bird kept annoying her, it felt like he was trying to get in her hair. And so she kept batting it away, trying to hang up the clothes. And she went in to get a broom to sort of shoo the bird away because the bird followed her right to the door. And in wartime, they used to hang stars in the window that the color of the star would indicate where your soldier was located, either the European theater, the Pacific theater, or wherever. And as she went in the house, that bird went and started pecking at that star in the window. And she come out and shooed it away with the broom, finished hanging up her clothes. And it was a while later that she was notified by the War Department that her husband had been killed in France. The time change and everything, that all happened at the same time that he was supposedly killed. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe there's a world beyond us that we tend to ignore a lot. But when things like that happen, it certainly intrigues our curiosity. It certainly lets us know. I think for the most part, with spirit phenomenon and things like that, we're all a bit of a doubting Thomas until it's proven to us. And I think that we shouldn't test the spirit world. We should just let it unfold as it unfolds. And I can be doing something most anywhere where my mind is focused on something, and suddenly I feel the presence of someone who may have died in the last year, and it sort of gives me such a peaceful feeling because I know that they have made the transition into the spirit world and they are making themselves known to me. And I always say to myself, hello, I'm glad you made it. And thank you for letting me know that you're okay. And that doesn't happen with everyone, but it's happened with me because it's part of my spiritual connection to not only this world, but the next world. It's also a part of my recognizing my gifts. It's also a part of an awareness that sometimes people fear. Sometimes people fear the unknown. I think that's what the fear is of death. It's such an unknown element. But yet, I'm always saying as I talk to my congregation in church, at St. Luke's Chapel, I always say to them, heaven is reported to be such a beautiful place, but everyone doesn't want to go. Everyone fears going. Very few people say, yeah, I'd love to go there. We can't go till we fulfilled our missions in life. But when we go, I know there's a peace that goes beyond all understanding. And I think that it's an intriguing thing to know that even though this body shall be destroyed, yet shall I see God. Yet shall I see my loved ones. Yet shall I see them face to face and be reunited with their love in a place where it's peaceful, in a place that's forgiving, in a place that embraces me with love. Because I know that because Jesus came back and embraced the people he knew and loved. My mother came back and embraced me with her love. And the soldier came back and embraced his sister with his love. And those are just a few things that have occurred that prove to me, beyond any doubt whatsoever, that we live after the change called death. And the resurrection proves that to me. And of course, there's things that fundamentalists will dispute. But I think that my abilities have been part of humanity since the beginning. And I think we can go all the way back to Noah and the ark. He had the intuition, or he was told that a flood was coming. Build an ark. They told him exactly what size to build it. He built it and saved the lives of all the animals and the people with him. Fascinating. My work has been so fascinating, and I hope that I haven't offended anyone's faith. But I have always believed that I have never been told what I have to believe. I tell myself what I do believe. And that changes on occasions. I'm open to the fact that it can change. But so many people have to believe with rigid regulation, rules, and laws what you have to believe. No, you should believe what is comfortable for your spirit and let it be that. And for me, my psychic work and the mediumship and the understanding that we continue after the change called death is just very significant to me to prove that life and love are eternal. That my spirit that gives my body life will continue to be alive after the body no longer lives. I think it's the Bible that says man shall live 70 years and 10, which is about 70 years. Give or take a little bit, that's pretty much the average, unless we die unexpectedly in an accident or our body gives out or whatever. But our spirit is maintained in the temple of the body, a temple that won't last forever, but our spirit does. Our body continues to live. As the heart begins to beat, the spirit enters the body, the spirit that gives it life, the spirit that gives it identity, the spirit that makes us who we are. And we know that that spirit comes in at the first heartbeat because we know it leaves at the last heartbeat. One of the things my mother always told her children, when I'm deceased, I want you to touch me because you will know that the spirit that gave me life is no longer in my body. And I can guarantee you that that experience was the love a mother gave us, because when I touched her, I knew that the mother I knew and loved was no longer in that body, but that she still surrounded me with her love. And so I find it all intriguing, mysterious, fascinating, and spiritually resolving for me. I hope that I've not offended anyone. I hope you've enjoyed this thoughts. Tony, do you have any questions?
Through your conversations, one thing I was wondering on are what are your thoughts on reincarnation?
My thoughts on reincarnation are that it probably exists. In the early church, many people believed in reincarnation. I think in many times it was part of the church. And because the spirit is eternal, we may not get everything accomplished in life if we're given a purpose. Say I'm given a purpose to become a medical doctor, and I get sidetracked with other things in life, like marriage, children, which create poverty, and I can't go to medical school. I don't become a doctor. So I do something else to sustain us, and I haven't fulfilled that purpose. So I may have to come back and fulfill that purpose. So I think that that's sort of the feeling I have. I believe in reincarnation, and I've been regressed a couple times into lives that I know happened. I know that I had a life in Ireland. When I went to Ireland, I just felt like I was home. We got lost around Galway, and I just instinctively knew of where I had to go to get to the bed and breakfast. And that wasn't a psychic thing. That was from a past life. And I know that I lived in that area in a past life. So I definitely think that we may have to come back more than once to fulfill our duties. So.
All right, very interesting. I thought you might want to mention about the radio show you just recently did.
I just did a radio show that I think you can still get on Spotify or YouTube with WEBO Radio in Owego. I'm doing another one tomorrow morning on April 16th. And I think we're going to do a regular show in which I will talk about different topics and the experiences that I've had. I used to do radio shows years ago in Elmira, New York, Binghamton, New York, and I had a weekly radio show that was extremely popular. I'm hoping at some point to find someone that will want to do an interactive podcast where people can call in and ask me questions like, where did Dad bury his money before he died, or, whatever. And so I can do that. I also still do consultations over the phone and in person. Of course, they're for your own enjoyment and entertainment, but yet it's a belief I have, and I hope it's a belief you have, that it may shed some light on your life in a positive way. I tell people there's a lot of charlatans in the field of psychic phenomenon, so be careful who you get involved with. I do put out a newsletter each Saturday from my church, St. Luke's Chapel in Van Etten, New York. And I started it out doing it for the small parish that I have, and it's grown to like 500 and some people. And if anyone would want to receive that newsletter, because it not only tells what we're praying for people sick or died, but I always put a spiritual message on that people have come to very much enjoy. So they can go to my email is philjordan1@juno.com. Phil Jordan, numeral 1 at the end of Phil Jordan, numeral 1.com, juno.com, Juno. philjordan1@juno.com. You can also get my church service at 4:30 on Saturday afternoons live on Facebook at St. Luke's Chapel, Van Etten, New York, and that's put live on Facebook, and then we put it on YouTube. So there's some on there now that I'm sure you can come up with. So.
And with the radio show, I believe you can find it on Spotify, like WEBO dash your hometown station. If you're out there looking for it on Spotify.
WEBO, your hometown station, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
And then I just had a couple more things. If you want to send an email on a future topic or a question for Phil regarding the podcast, you can send it to philjordanpsychic@gmail.com. That's philjordanpsychic@gmail.com. And then last question is, do you have an idea and a topic for the next podcast?
Okay. I always come up with the idea just before the podcast. So if anyone else has an idea they'd like to talk about, I certainly would be open to that as well. I never, ever encourage anyone to believe everything I believe, because we're all on an individual journey. And it's like with my church. I tell people, your faith is your faith. It's not my faith. I can't tell you what you have to believe. But through our love as a congregation, come to believe in something beyond this life, because it certainly makes this life a lot easier. So my psychic work has taught me tremendous things about my spiritual life and how to live this physical life. I've learned a lot. I growed up.
Very good.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And I will try to be more attentive to podcasts so I can get one out maybe every couple weeks over the next few months. Thank you.